big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. This is the East of England calling, and welcome to episode 124 of the Eastern Promise podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rigby, here to bring you an audio slice of Eastern excellence. My guest is Peter Freeman, Chair of Homes England and Chair of the Cambridge Delivery Group, established as a government team to advise on and drive forward the government's vision for Cambridge. Peter and I will discuss where that vision stands now, as well as how to solve the East of England's various infrastructure conundrums and create places that don't just meet targets, they make residents healthier and happier. So join us as we focus on how to deliver innovative and sustainable communities for Cambridge and the East of England on this week's Eastern Promise. When the previous government unleashed its case for Cambridge, it came as something of a bolt from the literal blue for leaders and officials across the city and the wider combined authority. It was the only one of its kind. There was no complementary case for Oxford, for London, Bristol, Birmingham or Manchester. It was accompanied by the formation of the Cambridge Delivery Group to drive forward what was very much the vision of the previous Community Secretary, Michael Gove. To chair the Delivery Group, the government turned to my guest today, Peter Freeman, Chair of Homes England, the government's housing and regeneration agency. I doubt that any city, town or county in our region, any region, relishes the prospect of a government task force wading into its business. However, Peter Freeman did something unexpected. He listened. He learned. He engaged, working hard to earn the respect of the people of Cambridge. For that alone, I wanted to sit down with Peter for a chat. And then there was a general election, a change of government, a new broom called Angela Rayner, changes to planning policy, new housing targets, and the end of levelling up, in name if not in spirit. There was so much I wanted to know. And so, just a stone's throw from Cambridge Station, Peter and I sat down for a proper chinwag.
Going way back, and it is way back because I'm 69 next week, I read history and I wasn't much good at that. And then I qualified as a lawyer and I wasn't much good at that. So I became a property developer and I turned out to be slightly better at that. And in the mid-90s, I began a development called Brindley Place in Birmingham, which was one of the first major mixed-use regeneration schemes. When I talk about a scheme rather than a building, it's because there were 3 public open spaces, 3 new squares. It was along the canal side. There was restaurants along the canal side, and it was mixed use. It had sort of office employment, but it also had residential. It also had retail and restaurants. It had a sea life centre. It had a theatre and an art gallery. So it was a place for people to meet in a city centre. And from Brindley Place, that led to Argent, the company my brother and I founded, being the winning bidders to redevelop King's Cross in London. And King's Cross had been derelict pretty much for 50, 60 years. You know, a few meantime uses like go-karting or dangerous nightclubs, but basically semi-derelict buildings, most of them going back to kind of the Victorian era. But it was right next to King's Cross and St Pancras stations, so fantastic connectivity. And it was on a canal, and it had some really beautiful listed buildings. So it was a huge opportunity opportunity to do something special, but very complex, because it was going to have every use, new primary school, hotels, as well as ordinary offices, ordinary residential. And our first occupier was Central St Martin's Art School. So, truly a part of London, not just an office development or residential development. And while doing that, I also tried to get permission to build a new market town in Sussex between Gatwick and Brighton, where the idea was the land would be bought sufficiently cheaply, because there was no expectation of planning there, that we would be able to pay for all of the schools and doctor surgeries and parks and playgrounds. And that's still staggering through the planning system 12 years after I started on it. Those connected experience, the new town in Sussex and King's Cross and Brindley Place, sort of led inexorably, I suppose, to thinking, it'd be interesting to be inside of government rather than outside of government, because they have all the planning levers and so on. And so I ended up in a role as chairman of Homes England, which is the government's housing and regeneration agency. Has an annual spend of about 4 billion, some of which goes for affordable housing grant to help housing associations, some of it goes for infrastructure to open up sites, some of it goes to loans to developers to pay for infrastructure and so on. And then in that role, I got asked to look at Cambridge and its ability to expand. And it's now been announced that I'll be stepping down as chair of Homes England shortly, in order that I can concentrate on Cambridge solely, which I'm very excited about, because it's just an amazing place. There's every challenge in the world to sort out water and transport and make sure that education and health services grow exponentially to meet additional populations, but it's a fantastic engine of growth. It's a beautiful place to live, and we ought to be solving its current problems and setting it up for the future.
One of the things that, I completely agree, but one of the things that really struck me, going back from when I saw you on stage at the 2023 Innovate Cambridge Summit, when I saw you on stage at UK Reeve alongside myself and the leader of Cambridge City Council, Mike Davey, and my old mate Jackie Sadek. And then again, at this year's Innovate Cambridge Summit in 2024, was the care, the real respect and care that you were taking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed you were very cognizant of how you'd been put in post and how that look might seem to a community, but you were feeling your way, and then you had that probably led to the mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, Dr. Nick Johnson, describing you as his new best friend on multiple occasions. So, what is it? Has it been your experiences that kind of drove that caution, do you think, or is that just innately in who you are?
That's interesting, the latter bit. I think innately I like to ask a lot of questions, just kind of natural curiosity. And although I kind of start jumping to conclusions quite quickly, I treat them all as preliminary conclusions, working hypotheses, and I go on asking questions, and I go on revising my opinions. And apart from the fact that there are 4 levels of elected local leaders here, the mayor, the county, the city and South Cambridgeshire, who know the patch and their job and their voters and their needs much more than I ever will. So, it would be an appalling discourtesy not to want to listen to them. They are the people who can probably tell me best, not just what they'd like, but what is needed and what is practical. And this is a kind of early exploration. If it's setting a 25-year business plan, growth plan, the first period is exploratory. You don't want to make decisions. You form hypotheses. You begin to kind of get a sense of what a realistic kind of optimum level of growth is, and then you keep on testing it, and you test it partly kind of rear view mirror, seeing what's been developed in the last few years, and in Cambridge, that they have done incredibly well. This has been a pro-growth council. They've been growing housing stock at about 1.7% per annum. Most of the southeast is near 0.7%. So that's double the rate of growth. But that's the rear view. Then you say if you took some of the restraints away, that the transport system isn't working, that there isn't enough water, and so on. Could you accelerate that? And that's partly about removing blockers, and that's partly about market demand. And if you're trying to understand the market demand, if you're saying Cambridge is the centre of life sciences in Europe, which I believe it is.
Agreed.
As opposed to just saying, well, how is Cambridge or Oxford or Coventry or Leicester growing? You say, well, what about Boston or whatever? So there's no definite correct answer. It's about making assumptions at the end of a long testing process, which are realistic, and then putting in place all the steps that are most likely to get you the optimum outcome. And although we call it Cambridge 2050, if it took to 55 or 60 to deliver the same growth, that's fine. The point of trying to reach and agree a number, and that number is probably a year away or more from being a kind of really proved evidence number rather than a kind of working assumption. But you need a number to start saying this is the infrastructure that goes with the number, and to say to the Treasury this is the funding pattern for that lot of infrastructure. If it takes a few more years or a few less years, doesn't really matter. But it's seeing that whole.
That's really interesting. And just to pick up on the Cambridge point, it always struck me there was the previous government lighted on Cambridge, and with 13 mentions in the Red Book this year, in this year's budget, this government is obviously very keen on Cambridge as well, and I think for slightly less ideological reasons, and I think we've discussed this before, slightly less ideological reasons, slightly more practical reasons, and this was the point Mike Davey makes on the stand at UK Reeve back in May 24, that even if the government was minded to look elsewhere, the gravitational pull of Cambridge will inexorably bring them back here, because they want that growth, and Cambridge is going to offer them that. So could I just ask you to give us an update on where things stand with the Cambridge Delivery Group? What can you tell us about where you are and what you're looking at in the sort of time ahead?
Right. So the Cambridge Delivery Group was and is just a working title for kind of a group of people, and the group of people were partly drawn from Homes England and partly drawn from what was DLUC and is now MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And it kind of operates as one kind of group of people under my chairmanship. The step further, which isn't a huge step, is creating a Cambridge Growth Company, which is a vehicle in its own right, but at the moment it is a wholly owned subsidiary of Homes England, which is an arm's length body of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So the body itself is wholly government owned. Its board are government appointees, which I chair, and the other appointees are all either civil servants or work for Homes England, which is similar to being a civil servant. But the significant thing that has changed in the last couple of months is it's been given the go-ahead to begin to recruit staff to be in Cambridge, and the aspiration is that we will get to 50 staff in the next 18 months based in Cambridge. And if the government felt that a development corporation was the right way forward, then that would be the initial staffing of it.
You mentioned development corporations, and I think that's probably to look at development economics is a good moment, and how we encourage patient capital. What are the benefits of a development corporation for those who perhaps aren't steeped in the law, as it were? And how do we sort of encourage and have more of that patient capital master planning approach? How do we bring that forward? How would you like to see that brought forward?
Well, I'll take a step back and say, what are the benefits of master planning and wider scale planning and mixed use delivery. Most developers historically have either built houses, or they've built offices, or they've built retail warehouse parks, or they've built industrial estates. They haven't combined them. And if you want to build communities, and if you want them to be sustainable, and if you want them to be meeting places in the way traditional towns were, most of our towns started as market towns, and the point was people came in because it was the market, and while you were buying and selling in the market, maybe you visited the apothecary or the lawyer or the hat maker at the same time. And if you build sort of siloed, this is just a big housing estate, this is just a big office park, this is just a big industrial estate, you don't get the people on the street, you don't get the activity. They have set hours, working hours, and then they close down. In the housing estates, they all leave at 8 in the morning, they all come back at 6:30 in the evening, whatever. So in order to get the sort of effect that city centres get, or single developments like King's Cross get, you need the mix of uses. And that partly requires a scale of land assembly. Something like King's Cross, the private sector could never have assembled that land. It was assembled by CPO 60 years before we started in 1947, when the government nationalised the railways, the freight industry, the water industry, the gas industry. So, most of what became our 67 acres passed through government hands in the post-war period, immediate post-war period. And if you want to plan city-scale development in a good way, there will be some sites where a landowner owns a few hundred acres, is either entirely competent to develop themselves, or will get into bed with an entirely competent developer, and they can create a new quarter of Cambridge with 10,000 homes and schools and shops and workplaces, and the transport systems can be built to join into it. But there will be other places where the ownership is much more fragmented. There's not a single owner who can take it forward and deliver it in that mixed-use way. And I think part of the purpose of a development corporation is to identify those and negotiate or use powers to assemble the land, and to make sure that it is delivered as a mixed-use master planned neighbourhood.
That's fascinating. Thank you. There's quite perhaps this is a media construct, but there always seems to be, particularly with infrastructure issues, this kind of, we can't actually sort of pick our priority. We endlessly, when we have sort of, I've been to any number of events over the years where, even including one recently, where you just get this restatement of problems. This, rather than, the question on our working group was, what is the first step we need to take? And it really sort of took someone to say, look, can we answer the question, what is the first step we need to take? And I'm not asking you to identify the first step, but perhaps it's, how can we sort of change that conversation that always seems to happen when we talk about these things, that we just restate the problem, we can't sort of come to any kind of fixed decision about, certainly that's the way it seems as an outsider, about what the priority is, and how can we bring more imagination. There is a question in here somewhere. How can we be more imaginative about finding those solutions?
I think part of the problem normally, nationally, is that short-term solutions are being looked for rather than long-term solutions, and solutions are being looked for in silos. So somebody is worrying about education, and they're probably worrying about education in 1,000 places, not just in Cambridge. And somebody's worrying about transport, but they're worrying about transport in 1,000 places, not just Cambridge, and so on and so forth. And I feel the purpose of the Cambridge Delivery Group or the Cambridge Growth Company or Development Corporation, if one comes, is to have one set of people who are only worrying about one place but are worrying about the interconnections of transport, health, education, funding for innovations, science, and so on. So that even though there are lots of different layers of government, 4 layers of local government here, and then you've got all the ministries in London, there needs to be somebody who's not worried about old people and young people tomorrow, which the local authorities have to worry about. They're not worried about congestion tomorrow, and they're not worried about another part of the country. They're just saying, how do we deliver the best Cambridge in 25 years' time? And almost my starting point is, what are we meant to have sold? If you came back here in 25 years' time, how different would it be? And then you try and see what the steps are to get there.
You're going through this, and you're actually, I'm running out of questions because you're answering them all before I get there, which is lovely. But so let's go back to new towns. I mean, I still want to visit somewhere, and I'm pretty sure that this is an example that couldn't necessarily be repeated, certainly not in the way it came about, but somewhere like Letchworth. The unique feel and look of the place and the services they provide to their residents has always been quite interesting. To take on from that, we've got places like, obviously, Milton Keynes is a great example. So what are the benefits of looking at new towns as opposed to urban extensions? Does that add to the problems of infrastructure, as you say, or to what extent are new towns and urban extensions interchangeable? Do they solve different problems?
I think Letchworth is actually pretty extraordinary, and what's more extraordinary is the man who built Letchworth in a pre-planning system. I think started life as a Hansard clerk in Parliament, then sold agricultural machinery in America, and then came back and managed to buy some farmland in a farming depression, probably in about 1910, not quite sure when, and to get a railway station built and to get some backers who I think were somewhere between philanthropists and businessmen. And his vision was that you would have, which never happened in full, you would have an overall community of about 250,000 people in 6 smaller satellite towns of 30,000. And there's a beautiful sort of diagram of it as a sort of circle with the six jewels on the circle. And in the middle there would be the main town of 60,000, and they'd all been joined by sort of very quick railway links. And the land between the 6 towns and the centre would provide enough agricultural produce, and most of the houses would themselves have back gardens that were big enough to grow some of their own veg. And he designed something, in a sense, off the back of his thinking, without any departments or academics behind him, that I think has stood the test of time very well. But at the heart of it was, it was a place where people could move very easily. That the distances were not big. 30,000 people is a decent size. It would have been very big for a market town then. It would have been a proper town, less than a county town, but a proper town where everybody could get their education, their health, their employment, their leisure, and whatever. So I think one advantage of a new town is you can sort of start from scratch. And when he started his new town, not everybody had a car. And it was probably, in some ways, better designed than most of the new towns of the 50s and 60s, because by the 50s and 60s, the assumption was everybody would have a car. Nobody was worried about pollution or the cost of petrol or health. And, so if you go to most new towns, they'll just roundabout after roundabout after roundabout to manage the traffic. And I think the new round of new towns that is envisaged will, I'm sure, be more reliant on active travel and public transport and less reliant on cars. So, there's an advantage in doing a new town because you can plan from scratch. The disadvantage of doing a new town is you have to start from scratch and you don't get critical mass quickly. If you look at the developments that Urban and Civic do, and they are Britain's best sort of master developer of new settlements of kind of 8,000 homes ago, they're only actually building out at several hundred homes a year. So to build those schemes out is taking 20 years. And those schemes in themselves are too small to offer a full range of employment. They can offer schooling, but you need to be part of a bigger community. So if you do an urban extension, you've got the advantage. There's already mainline railway stations there. There may already be a university there. There may already be a hospital there. And there's a lot of jobs. And even if you did a new town that attracted one big occupier to begin with, which it probably wouldn't because there wouldn't be the pool of staff. Staff like to go to a place where if they change their mind about a job, there's another job nearby and they don't have to move home.
Yeah.
But if you're in a small place, so there's an agglomeration effect that, you know, the bigger the town, the more different types of employment, the more different employers, the more attractive it is for somebody to live there, because there's going to be something for everybody. And if you go and live there with your partner might want one sort of job and you want another sort of job. And a small town probably doesn't have it. So urban extensions as new towns may be a way forward where you're getting the best of both worlds. You're planning, whether you call it a neighbourhood, a district, a quarter, that could be 20,000 homes, 30,000 homes, but it's in the context of another 50 or 100 or 200,000 homes that already exist and provide hospitals and mainline railways and a range of employment.
Fantastic. I'm going to cut out all this me saying fantastic because it just sounds ridiculous. But so you made a really interesting point earlier about everyone focused on their little part of the issue rather than seeing a big picture. So is it the case that somewhere like Cambridge would need sort of an infrastructure body where everybody, or is this what happens? Everybody got Anglia Water, UKPN, Cadent, and the local communities actually come down and say, what do we need, and Openreach say, what do we need to do, and how can we minimise the effort, the cost?
I think the starting place, having kind of worked out what market demand with the brakes off because infrastructure is provided, it says you could reach, is then to say what's the infrastructure we need. And the job of a development corporation should actually be, in my view, to have minimal footprint rather than maximal. So it's not, if there's somebody else who can do it, a utility company, a local authority, a private landowner, they should do it. The development corporation should be there to identify what needs to do and who best can do it, and only in a sense be stepping in where there's not an obvious better person that's already got the staff, the land, the technology, the equipment, the license, the mandate, the whatever. So when you said Anglia Water or whoever, I completely agree. If they are ready and willing and have the capacity to do it, then they should do it. And central government, of which we're a kind of representative, should just identify the need and their willingness to do it. And if we can help in some way, which might be in terms of land assembly, it might be in terms of convening power with landowners, it might be in part financing, then we help, but we identify the problem and who best to actually deliver the solution physically.
The Newtown sandpit that Eastern Promise is going to do in June, and I'm not going to ask you to sort of come up with a preferred direction of travel. So the preposition is going to be on the Cambridge-Norwich corridor. If we're going to put a new town here to serve both cities, how do you do it right? How do we do it the best way possible? Roughly where, and how do we do things like active travel dominating, rail access, etc. And we're getting people like Emma Fletcher of Octopus and the Swaffham Prior CLT to come and talk about things like district heating and so on. The first question is, what do we need to do with this event to make it useful, of practical value to people like yourself, to policymakers, etc.?
Ooh, haven't answered that one before. I suppose it's partly who you get along, partly what gets said in the room, and partly how useful conclusions from that are fed back to central government. I assume that you will probably have the leaders of local government in the room.
They will certainly be invited, and I'm sure they'll come along.
Yeah. I guess things that would come out of it is where might one or more new towns be between Cambridge and Norwich, and that will probably be a mixture of their relationship to the existing road and rail network, the ecological conservation landscape issues around different places, and how much the leaders would like to start from scratch, or how much the leaders would like to bolster an existing city of some significance. I mean, between Cambridge and Norwich, the biggest cities are probably, 50,000 people or something?
I couldn't give you a figure off the top of my head.
What sort of somewhere like Bury St Edmunds, or?
Yeah, there's Bury St Edmunds. I mean, I know that Norwich is technically, I think, probably in terms of being bigger than, it's supposed to be bigger than Cambridge, and then it's Peterborough is the next biggest.
I think Norwich is meant to be about 220,000.
Yeah.
So, it's somewhere between economic decisions, transport decisions, landscape decisions, and political decisions. And if the conference helped kind of find where the conflicts between those different decisions were, and B, I don't suppose you're going to leave the room saying, Eureka, we definitely know it's there on the map. But if it helped reinforce with local leaders the facts they should take away from the room in order to try and say, I think it's there on the map, and these are the studies that we need to commission to include whether it's there or there or there. And B, if you came away with economic evidence for the Treasury that creating another, I don't know what it is, 50,000 homes and 50,000 jobs at some particular spot between Norwich and Cambridge was particularly powerful economically, rather than doing it somewhere else, that'd be a pretty tremendous outcome.
It's a very gentle throwing down of the gauntlet. What I will sort of add to that is, we're actually today on the 6th floor of Mills and Reeve, which is where I've done so many. I've lost track of how many podcasts I've recorded up here. But we've got, I think, probably, if not the best view of the city, one of the best views of the city of Cambridge. And we did the recent How the Brex Can Support the Growth of Cambridge. That was recorded in Norwich. We actually had the Deputy Leader of Breckland Council, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning, was on that panel. She's actually been on several panels. I learned a lot from doing that. It was a really positive event. But what I would say to you is, if we were to repeat the exercise here in Cambridge and take a sort of different, a slightly different view, how would that have to change to make that of value? Would we have to sort of look a little less at housing, a little more at how that needs to feed into the innovation space we need? What would need to be different to make that of equal or greater value to, again, policymakers and professionals such as yourself?
If you're doing the same sort of conference?
Here in Cambridge. You can say, get off my turf if you like, I don't mind.
I think it's a different question. I mean, Cambridge has a proven effect, the Cambridge phenomena. B, central government has decided it would like to see very significant growth here. The local leaders have already been on a growth agenda that they haven't necessarily brought into the sort of figures that have come out of Whitehall, and they shouldn't be required to until there is evidence to support it and proof that infrastructure will back it up. But I think the sort of description that I was giving of the conference that you were talking about for midway between Cambridge and Norwich is not so relevant to Cambridge, because it is the policy and the vehicle are much further ahead. So I think on Cambridge it's sort of getting down to providing the evidence and beginning to explore in a much more sort of technical and granular detail how you could resolve transport and where best around the town growth could go. There's clearly going to be growth here, whereas if you were in the Cambridge to Norwich corridor, you're still in the business of putting pins in maps and saying 5 miles east, 10 miles west.
No, I mean, it's an excellent point because with the conversation I had with the Environment Agency, the chaps, when I was discussing it with him, and my fondness for Thetford, which was a focus of a lot of our discussions on the Brex panel, he sort of said, oh yeah, you got the river in there, you got the river in there, the railway, that would work really well. Whereas obviously it's a very different conversation. Yeah. And fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So perhaps that's something that'll take some sitting down and thinking about to make that useful. But I really appreciate your advice on that, and to be useful and to be a serious contribution to the debate for, but not just the Cambridge-Norwich one. I mean, maybe it needs to be a Cambridge-Ipswich one. But to be useful, practical and helpful is all I hope for from the event, not just, hey, look, newspapers, we've done this. I mean, I'm not really interested in getting it in the press because I don't need to be. Anyway, that's enough of bigging myself up. So if you're listening...
You probably don't want it in the press because then people will get excited and be opposed to it. So under the radar if you can.
I will go under the radar. I'm very well used to doing that. Peter Freeman, what a pleasure to have you on Eastern Promise. I'm so honoured that you've found time to be with me today, and that's sincere.
Thank you for interviewing me.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
You're a very, very positive interviewer, so it's actually a pleasure rather than feeling sort of defensive or anxious.
That's the whole ethos of Eastern Promise is to shout about these. The answer to the question, why don't we don't shout about ourselves enough? And it's, well, that's what I'm here to do. And I'm not a journalist. I'm here to basically sell the East of England in however it wants to represent itself to the outside world. And Cambridge in particular, but the whole region, give me a lot of great stuff to work with. It's so easy to be upbeat and positive, and the way you've started working with the city has made that even easier because you've taken so much care, and I know it's been so appreciated to get to know the place. And before just going, hey, I've got a government mandate and I'm going to do this and this, you've actually really taken that time, that care. And as I say, I know it's been appreciated. Thank you for being on Eastern Promise today.
My pleasure, thank you, Mike.
Never let it be said that Eastern Promise shies away from the issues. My huge thanks to Peter and to the team at Homes England, especially Executive Assistants Extraordinaire Steph Braithwaite and Karen Driscoll, and also the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, without whom this simply could not have happened. And that's it for episode 124 of the Eastern Promise podcast. I have been your host, Mike Rigby, and I will be so again in merely 7 short days when we bring you a stacked roundtable discussion on how the East of England's small and medium-sized businesses can win more government trade. We'll be coming to you from the offices of the Crown Commercial Service, part of the Cabinet Office, where Neil Smith of the CCS, Greg Gibson of Mills and Reeve, Candy Richards of the Federation of Small Businesses, Jack Weaver of the Norfolk Chambers of Commerce, and the one, the only, Tim Robinson of Tech East join me for a fascinating deep dive into the issues involved. See? Told you! Stacked! Join us all next week. But until then, bye for now. To hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Priorscroft production in association with Mills and Reeve, achieving more together.